All right. So as I was saying before, where today, by the end of today's lessons, right, at the end of the by 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., whatever, you guys are going to have all that you need to know for the exam. So there's nothing on Monday and Tuesday that's going to be new information that you're going to be tested on. So today we're going to talk about, get the schedule up. So we're talking about validations and bcrypt. So securing passwords, security, stuff like that. I want to spend the morning though, just kind of doing a review and introducing the validations. Okay, so I want to basically start from a CRUD application, the user's CRUD assignment, and build into it the form validations. Okay, so just to get back to this. So next week, Monday and Tuesday, is going to be primarily just review for the belt exam and doing preparations, making sure everybody's up to speed and ready to go. Okay, so any questions about the schedule or what we're doing next week or the exam, anything like that? You guys don't have any questions about the exam?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Unless it's something that we're going to do today or next week, but I saw that for the black belt, you needed to push your website on a third-party site or something like that.
Thank you so much for reminding me. That's there was something that was escaping my recollection. That's what I want to say. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So for the black belt, one of the requirements is you need to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Deploy.
Thank you, deploy. That was a D word. You need to deploy your application on AWS. So the AWS account sign-in process, they offer a free tier for a year. And you can use their, basically have no charge at all for the first year for certain things. I mean, you can't like go crazy, but so sign up for that today or tonight. Don't do it right now, but it takes I think it takes 24 hours to activate. So just to make sure that everybody is ready to go for Wednesday, if you want to do the black belt, then sign up for AWS tonight.
That's only if you want to do the black belt.
If you want to do the black belt, yeah. Yeah, you don't have to deploy for the red belt, but it's part of the requirements for the black belt. So I suggest everyone go for the black belt because it's like there's no big loss if you don't get it, right? But if you do, then it's it's a bonus. Any other questions? We'll jog my memory if you do.
Where was that indicated? The black belt.
So when I administer the exam, I will give you the requirements for the black belt. I don't think it's on the.
It's on the website.
Is it? Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the belt review. So the belt review has all of the like the belt exam. If you click on that, it'll give you all of the rubric that I need to follow in grading your exam. Give you the scores, and I'll go over this next week in more detail. But everything you need to do is here, right? So basically what I'm going to be grading you on is right here. So no surprises. And again, I'll go into more detail about this next week, but there's not a 24-hour time limit. It's a 5-hour limit. I don't know. That's incorrect.
Since it's on there, can we take the 24 hours?
No.
24 does seem about right.
No, 24 hours is way too much time. If you are deploying though, if you are going for the black belt and it's not deployed within the 5 hours, that's fine. That's not you have extra time for the deployment because that may take a while. But the actual completion of the red belt and everything up to deployment has to be done within the 5 hours.
So now that we have the requirements in front of us, just to be clear, you and I talked about this yesterday. None of the CLS or CSS stuff is being graded.
Thank you for asking. No. If it's the ugliest website I've ever seen, I can't take any point, and I wouldn't. I don't take off.
Sounds good.
For style or prettiness or
Thank
if you use
God.
Bootstrap. Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah. That was Web Fun. That's Ed stuff. I'm horrible at CSS, so I can't really judge. Any other questions about the exam or anything? The schedule.
I just real quick for the deployment, does it have to be AWS or is it just like any cloud service?
That's a really good question. And does it have to be to AWS? Can I use Heroku or something like that?
That's what I was thinking.
No, so Heroku is not allowed. Basically what you need to do is you need to be able to deploy it to a Ubuntu server.
Hmm.
So it doesn't technically have to be AWS, but it does have to be like a virtual machine because Heroku is very boilerplated. You kind of just need to upload your project and it kind of does everything for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, no Heroku.
Okay, sounds good.
Good question. I was actually been meaning to ask that question. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Let me get. So it seems like there was an issue with people following along. So what I want to just do real fast is, just 1 second, let me get my notes up. Okay,
So I guess I do have a question right here.
sure.
It says create backend Flask application without the use of a database. So it doesn't want us to be able to use MySQL.
Where do you see that?
The second line, the second thing. Yeah,
Use Flask to accept HTTP French.
the top part just says create backend Flask application without the use of a database.
No, you have to use a database.
Rubric's lying to me right now.
Use Flask to accept call methods, query databases. That's weird.
I think it's giving us like different instructions.
Yeah, because the next one talks about SQL too.
Yeah, that create back.
And
I
then the
think what
next
that's
one's the-
saying is they want you to be able to, like what we do before SQL. Like there's a section before we get into SQL that just deals with session. So
Right.
I think that's what they're saying is they want you to be able to use session and
Okay.
be I guess conservative with your calls to the database.
Oh, okay, okay. So at least one or two, one instance of,
Yeah, because
or
we
at
want
least
to,
an instance in there. Of
right. So we
session.
want to use a database, but we want to minimize the number of times we query our database because it's expensive and it takes resources. So if there's
Okay.
a way to say display a user's name on a page without using a database call, they want you to implement those strategies.
Got
But
it.
it's not asking just to like build the controllers. That's kind of how I interpreted that. Just like build the endpoints.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah, but yeah, that's
Makes sense.
basically you want to be able to have an application that's functional without complete reliance on a database.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I have posted to the repo the basically everything that I'm going to do aside from the annotations that I'm going to demonstrate. So I'm just going to demonstrate real fast cloning the database, or I'm sorry, the repository. So this is my repository. So I'm just going to clone this so you guys see exactly what I'm showing. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to go to here and I'm just going to put it on my desktop. I think it's there. Yeah. So let's get clone, and then on Windows I think you have to right click and paste. There we go. Cool. So now it's on my desktop. I CD into it, and I'll open it with Visual Studio Code. And here we are. Okay, so this is, let me just get the application. So if you navigate to day 10, inside of files, I have basic form validation, bcrypt, login and reg. I'm going to start here with CRUD. And basically, we're going to take this application and I'm going to demonstrate how it works, kind of review how it works, and then add in the validations. Okay, so I'm going to open this in a separate window or separate Visual Studio Code window. So and I'm going to close some of this stuff. It's a mess. Is that the one I wanted? User cred. Yeah, cool. All right. So once I have my repository and have everything set up, can I just run Python server.py?
You need the show.
Yeah. So this is, I just downloaded this. So I'm going to run just to make sure everything's there. And let me just check my pip file to make sure it's everything I need. No, yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to say pip env install. And since I already have my pip file, it'll look into the pip file, see what packages it needs to install, and it will install those. So for now, I just need Flask and PyMySQL. When we get into bcrypt, we're going to be installing a third package here. So when we start our applications, we're going to need to run basically pip env install Flask, PyMySQL, and Flask bcrypt. Okay, but for now, we just need these two.
Where did you install the PyMySQL? Like, was it already installed so that when you did Flask install, it just did it, or?
Yeah, so my
Okay.
pip file has all of the dependencies, anything
Okay.
that I need. So just by running, if this is present, if the pip file is there, all you need to do is say pip env install, and it will look in this file and install the packages that are listed.
Okay. And just to be clear, because I'm not sure if I asked it yesterday and if anybody else had the question, but you don't have to reinstall or anything, any updates you do to SQL will automatically update and you don't have to like reinstall a package or anything.
No, so the way that our application interacts with our database is this PyMySQL. So that's just a library that one of the many libraries that Python has to interact with the database. SQL Alchemy is another common one, but as convention, we use PyMySQL. Yeah, any other questions? And so now I need to run pip env shell. Make sure that's running, and then I can say Python, whoops, Python server. And my server's running. That's a good sign. Go back here and I've got these users already installed. Joe Dirt. I always do that. I gotta stop doing that stuff. Okay. Anyway, delete them. So everything's functioning, everything's working, but I want to basically go through like following the data, following the information as you're looking at an application. Okay, so what is the starting point of our application? Like how do we start it? Like where's the root of it?
Server?
Yeah, so server.py, if you go into server.py, one second. So what's happening on this first line?
Port in the Flask folder.
Yeah. So this line, this comes from Flask app underscore or dunder init, right? So we're basically taking our dunder init file, we've imported in there, and bringing it in here so that when we start our application with Python server, it automatically fires up, right? What about the next line? What does that do?
That's importing your users from your controllers.
Yep, exactly. So before we did the modularization, all of our routes lived in server, right? We just had one server, all of our routes were listed there, but to modularize and make it easier to have our project scale, we separate them out into separate files so it's easier to manage. So you know that if you need to make a route for your posts, right? You don't have to scroll through a line, a file of 20 different routes or 30 routes or however many. It's all compartmentalized into files and you just know, okay, I need to go to posts.py and update the controller. Right, so this comes from Flask app controller. And so I just said this, so let me just And by the way, I will push these comments I'm adding. At the end of the day, I'm going to push them to GitHub, so you'll have them. So don't you worry about like typing them out. Okay, so I just want you guys to sort of get an overview, get a feel for how the application works, and basically we're following the application so we can understand how it's wired and how it operates. Okay. So after I come here, the next place I want to look, or what I want to basically point out to you, is the dunder init. Okay. So in dunder init, what does this file do?
It's kind of like what our old server.py was doing, right?
Kind of. I mean, one thing you can do is you can put your imports here, but I just kind of want you to be aware that this
It makes
is,
the whole thing Python, doesn't it? Is that it?
I'm sorry, say again?
Does it make the whole Flask app Python? Is that what
It makes,
is?
exactly, yes, it makes it a Python package. So Flask app, I mean, it's a package anyway, but the dunder init will allow us to just make our imports more simplistic or simplified. So when we want to import, like if I want to bring in Flash, which we're going to talk about today, I can import it here. And then when I need it in another directory, I can just say from Flask app import Flash.
Is there a
Okay, so-
reason you're in it is like X'd out right now on line 1?
Next out.
Or yeah, like named out on line 1?
Oh, I've just put the name of the file on the top so you know where I was.
Okay, so you don't need
Yeah.
an actual init in.
You can take this out. If that's, yeah, I just put that there so you know what file you're in. Yeah, that has nothing to do with anything. That was just there for, I don't know. If it's confusing, I'll just take it out. Yeah, so basically not much is going to change in this file. We can add the imports if we want, but if that's confusing to you, then just, don't worry about it. But I like to put my imports here just so that's like whenever I need to import something, they're all in the same place and it's easy to find and more organized. Okay, questions so far?
What do you mean by the imports?
So imports, like I'm from Flask, import Flask. I can import all the imports in here, and then it simplifies the import statements. But if that doesn't make sense to you, then don't worry about it. I don't want to confuse the issue. So when I say like import Flash here, I can then go into my controllers and I can say from Flask app import app, and oh, I already did it here. Yeah, so you know what? Yeah, just forget I said that. I don't want to confuse the issue more. So just the dunder init is basically what ties your Flask app together as a single package. Okay. Tyree, do you have a question? Let's see you.
You answered it. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so from our server, so once we run server.py, where does Python look next for handling our Flask application? And actually, why'd my server stop? Oh, because I'm messing around. Okay.
Route?
Yes, but where do our routes live?
Controller.
Yes. So if I come into server, we see up here, from Flask app.controllers, we import users. So this is sort of just like an import statement. It's as if we had all of the routes in our users controller in this file. So this is basically directing Python to look in users for our routes. So if I come into, open up controllers, go to users. This is basically the next stop. And I don't know why this pops up all the time. Okay, so what's happening in this first line? Where does this come from, this app?
It's like
Importing it from the dunder init.
Exactly, yeah. So we're creating our Flask application, just like we did all this in server.py initially. We're defining our Flask app, right? We do from Flask, import Flask. Let me take this out. And then we set up our app. We call the Flask class, pass it where it needs to look. And then the app.secret is for sessions. We'll talk about that a little later. But when anything that's in this dunder init.py, when we want to import it, all we have to say is from Flask app and then do the import. We don't have to put any additional like location on our import statements. So this comes from dunder init.py. What is this? What are we doing on line 2?
It's like all the functionality so we can like return it, put it to new routes and other stuff like that.
Yeah. So these are the methods that we use in our routes that we're importing from the Flask module. Okay, so everything that we're going to need, like redirect, request, session, render template, whatever we need, we're importing it from the Flask package. So we don't need to worry about that, right? We don't need to worry about how these methods work or how they're written. We just have them and they're just tools we can use. I forgot to annotate this one. What does this do? What is this one?
That's allowing us to import our class.
Right, we're importing the models we need for the route, right? Okay, so this allows us to use to call user.save, right? To call user.getAll. Like, so all of these methods are available to us because we've imported them from flaskapp.models.user, which is basically saying, look inside a Flask app, look inside the models directory and grab the user file. But I didn't need to do that. Okay, questions so far?
I don't mean to backtrack, but when you put all your app.routes into this file, you're only moving the ones that are associated with said controller, correct? So like in dojos and ninjas, for example, I'm only going to move the app.routes that affect my dojo controller.
Yes.
And then the other ones that affect the ninja controller, I'm moving those into the ninja.
Yes. Yes, true. That's right. So we can have, and we will have multiple controllers, and the controllers will control the routes for whatever model we're dealing with. So if we have a separate model for, say, posts or whatever, we would have a separate file called posts.py, and those would all have routes that basically have to do with posts or whatever the model is. Yeah, that's very good. We want to and the whole point is to separate things out and make it more organized. Any other questions? All right, let me see if I can get this started again. There we go. All right, so what about this one? So I have some notes in here already. So this creates the route creates the root route of the application and displays all users. So this is where we start our CRUD, right? So this is, and they're not going to be in order, but pretty close. So this is read, right? So let me change that to, there we go. So this is when we're getting users and displaying them to the screen, right? We use this. This is where basically we start. So we start with reading information from the database that we can post to our views. Okay, so what does this method do?
It's a method for the user class that gets all of your users inside of your user table.
Exactly, yeah. So this is basically, you just said what I have here. So yeah, it's the class method in the users class, and it's in, and this is wrong. It's in models. Models users. So coming over to when this method is invoked, we call that method in user.py. Save this and open this one. side by side. Try to. There we go. Save everything, close the stuff. Okay. So we have users get all corresponds to this method here. So how does this method work? What does this do?
Can you repeat what you said?
I'm sorry. So what does this get all method? What does this do?
It's pulling all of the, well, that one specifically, it's pulling all of your users from your user table out of your database.
Exactly. So this is a class method that basically queries our database table that corresponds to this model name. So it's called, I'm calling it user, but I could call it posts or widgets or whatever we have, right? This is just going to query the database. And Eric, what's up?
When I was going through the readings, was it trying to say that when you're pulling the data from the database, it comes in the form of dictionaries?
Good question. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
it comes, but now, and that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. And I was going to mention this yesterday. I asked James to remind me. He reminded me, and then I promptly forgot, but I remember today. So we have these, this isn't part of Python. Well, I mean, it is part of Python, but they don't really do anything. We can say arrow list, okay? And this is just an indication for us of what this method is going to return. Okay, so if we include this, if I come over to, and if I save my file, if I come over to users.py, and I can't remember what get all returns or what it takes, right? So I can come over here and hover over this, and why isn't it working? I did get all. There it is. So if I include this annotation here, this arrow, and then I say what kind of data type it's going to return, I can hover over this method. And because of that, it will tell me what this method is going to return. So when I invoke it, I know what to expect from my database. So I know that when I call a list of, when I call get all, it's going to return a list. So how do I know it's returning a list?
Because of the line 20?
Yeah, exactly. I set up a list here to hold the values, right? So results is what we get back from the database. And I recommend that if you're ever troubleshooting, put in a print statement here, like print result, right? And notice what prints, right? Follow the data, try to deduce, don't just memorize or, copy the syntax. Try to understand what's happening. So when I query the database, results comes back and I can print out results to see what I'm getting. Results is going to be a list of dictionaries. Okay, so I create my list to hold what comes back or what I'm going to make. Then for this line here, for user in results, what am I doing here? What does this line do?
Line 22?
Yeah.
You're iterating?
Just
Yeah.
grab from the database.
Right, I'm taking data from, I'm going to say taking dictionaries from DB and making user objects.
So it'd only do the first one if you didn't do this, right?
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so if I just returned the bare, just what came back from results, I would have a list of dictionaries, but I wouldn't be able to use the class-based syntax. I wouldn't be able to go like user.name or user.email, right? So we iterate over the list of dictionaries, and for each one we append convert it to a user instance and append it to the users list. Okay, so we know we can put this annotation here. That way we know if we have a reference as to what it's going to return. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
On line 19, the query DB part, that's a protected function or something, right? Like the query DB all the way at the end, that's a function built in.
So this function, did anybody remember where this function lives?
Is that coming from our import?
It's not coming from the import. So connect to MySQL. Where does that come from? We
The config.
yeah. So in the config, whoops, PyCache. That PyCache, by the way, is just what Python does to speed up, so you don't need to worry about that or anything in there. Yeah, it comes from the MySQL connection.py.
Oh,
Right,
okay,
so-
see.
Yeah, so we're making this class. That class has an instance method, queryDB, and then the only thing we're basically using from this file is this function right here.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So is this helpful? I mean, are you guys
Yeah, it's really helpful.
okay?
Yes.
Okay. As I don't want to like insult your intelligence. Like if this is too basic, I want to go on to other stuff. But if this is helpful,
we can't go too basic.
Okay.
This is exactly how I was talking to myself this morning to figure this one out.
okay, good. Okay. Awesome. All right. So I'm just going to bounce back and forth. And again, these are going to be available on the repo, so you don't have to worry about cutting and pasting. Let's see, where did I leave off? Where am I? Okay. So going down to the next method in our controller, right? We have, so this is read. What is this route here? So this route shows the new user form, right? So this route, when the user goes to users /new, all we're doing is rendering the new template. So if I go back to my application and I click, why isn't it going there? Oh, it's taking a while. Oh, it crashed, I guess. Sorry, got too much stuff open. Here we go. No, there. Huh. What did I do? Users. So I'm following the stack trace, app controller users.py. I broke something on, oh, right here. Typo, I guess. Cool. So if I go back to my application, refresh. So this is the route, and I'm rendering the form to create a new user or to add a user. Okay, so would this be, which part of CRUD would that be? Whoops.
See?
Yeah, exactly. So this is create. So when we're creating something, when we're getting any type of data from the user, the create is going to have two methods, right? So we have a method to display the form, and we have a method to process the data. Okay, so these two methods both fall under the create category. So we have the one that, this is just a render template, and then we have our form. The action goes to create /user. And whenever we handle information, whenever we get stuff from the front end, and we have this methods post, we always redirect. Okay, so this is going to be the pattern anytime you're making a create. You're going to process or display the form, and then have another route to handle the form. Okay. What does this method here do?
Save the code to the
database.
Yeah, so this will save the code to the database. So where does this method live?
MySQL connections.
No.
Inside
So we're
your
calling
model.
user.save, right? Where does user live?
It's inside of your model.
User
Yeah.
PY.
in the model. So it's user.py. So it's right here. User.save. So this method is class method that basically adds a user to our database, right? Now I have this here, this return. So this returns an int, right? How does it return an int? Why does it return an int? And what int does it return?
ID, right?
Yep, exactly. So once this is successful, if this is able to post to the database, it will return the ID of the user that we've inserted. Okay, so back in the controller, if we have to route to like a show page for the user we just created, sorry, like we do here, right? So I set this call, this user.save, to a variable, right? I set it to a user because I'm going to redirect, and oftentimes they'll have you redirect to the show page for the user we're creating, but we just created it, right? So in order to render or to return a show, we need to have the user's route, and then we tack on the ID of the user to render them. The only way to access that ID when we first created a user is to get the ID that's returned from calling this method. Okay, so there we go. So if you forget, you can tack on that arrow and it'll tell you that, okay, this is going to return an int. I also put in here in the arguments, if you say data or whatever the argument is, and then colon the data type, the dict, it'll tell you that when we pass it or we call this method, we need to pass it a dictionary. Okay. Does that make sense? Do you guys understand this? Because this is the first time I'm talking about it.
Yeah, what does that mean again? So data colon dictionary.
Yes, so data colon dict. So if this is all we need is the front part, all we need is the data, right? But Python allows us to add these, and this is new in Python. I think I don't know when they started this, but we can add these basically indications of what the data type that's being accepted. It's not going to enforce it. Like we can still call this method and pass it a string, but to help us out, we can say, okay, this is supposed to be a dictionary and this method is going to return an int. That way, when we hover over it or as soon as we write it, it's going to tell us, and I keep messing up, here we go. It's going to tell us, okay, this is supposed to, if I hover over the right one, there we go. It'll tell us the data that you're supposed to be passing in is a dictionary and you can expect to get an integer back.
And we're getting the ID, which is an int. How again? Like, can you go back to how it's going to return the integer?
Yeah. So the query that's made, so we basically write our query to, am I doing the right one? Yes. Our query to save a user. We call the function connect to MySQL database. We call the query DB. So when it's performing this kind of action, when it's inserting, right, this will return an integer. That's just the way it works in MySQL connection. Okay, it's just set up that way to return the ID of the user that's inserted.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so when it's performing different actions, it's going to return different data. Like down here, like results is going to be a list, right?
So just that line 29, the return, connect to MySQL, that whole line is what's giving you the integer by
Yes,
itself?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you mind like writing that in on the notes? That's what that line's doing?
Yeah. I would be happy to.
Thank
So
you.
this is going to the return statement returns the ID as an int of the user created. Does that make sense?
This is a dumb question. Why do you have two hashtags?
I just put two there, doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Tim.
So I'm like digging into the MySQL connection.py, you know, to figure out why it's bringing an integer. But I remember you saying, don't even worry about looking into MySQL. So
No,
I'm
so I don't want to discourage your curiosity. That's awesome that you're looking.
but okay, so this is going to return an integer
Yeah.
based on what we queried.
Yes.
Okay.
I wasn't prepared for this, so I'm kind of going into uncharted territory here. So, yeah, so the query DB, so it takes data, and you can see that all these if, else, try, except, it says in here somewhere, there's a note that says, yeah, so insert queries will return the ID number of the row inserted.
Oh, okay. I just saw those if else. I was like, all right, maybe I shouldn't be digging in too much.
No, that's cool. That's awesome that you're looking, but I don't want to confuse people who are just, yeah. Eric.
Another dumb question on the user pie. Is it user pie? Yeah, so on line 35, the database in the parentheses, where does that come from? Is that something that we
Yes.
made up, or is that
No,
just
no.
like
So
a
this is
protected
something
thing?
that I do, and you can do this, or tell me to go pound sand, whatever works for you. I always, whatever database I'm hooking up, I make this variable here, and when it's in all caps, it signifies that it's a constant. So I just write my database name here one time. So instead of saying model schema, like for every time I call connect to MySQL,
Yeah.
I just pass in this variable. That way I
Gotcha.
only have to change it one time. And this I would
Okay.
highly recommend, because time is of the essence on the exam. So once you make your database, you can just write it one time. And again, you're going to have all this code, right? This is going to be pre-written. Please don't write it during the exam. Have this pre-written. And then so that way, all you have to do is boom, make one change and you're hooked up to your database.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right. Where was I? Request not save. Okay. So we talked about the create. All right, so I think we're down to this one. So this route here, what does this one do?
That's the one.
What?
So that's the one that takes the new user, right, and puts in the specific user ID. That's why it has the int there, right?
And then it'll display it on another page, like show page, show this.
Yeah, exactly. So this one, what part of CRUD is this?
Right.
All right.
This is still the C, or wait?
So C is create, CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. So are we update? What the hell is
creating?
That was weird. I'm sorry.
Wouldn't you be creating it though, because you just made a new user, or is this updating?
No, so look at the method we're using, right? So we're getting one. So if we're taking from what's already in the database,
or just reading.
Yeah, just reading.
Oh, okay.
So this is read. So we're just displaying the data to our, so this will take a users, and then the int is the ID of the user. We pass that in. Why do I make this dictionary here?
Because it takes a dictionary.
Exactly.
Takes
so if you hover over the method, it'll tell you this data you pass in, it's got to be a dictionary. So if you're trying to pass in an ID, just the integer that comes from the route, it's going to break. So
and that comes from your text document, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
And that comes from your text document, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so because we're going to be querying our database, right here, we're going to be saying get one, which is in our users right here, right? So we need to pass in a dictionary, so we can't just pass in the bare ID, right? So we get the ID. When the route fires, it comes in as the variable, like we first talked about when we were doing the dreaded checkerboard assignment, right? Where you can just pass in integers in our route. But that integer has to be in the form of ID. We can't, or I'm sorry, in the form of a dictionary. So we can't just pass it in to get one. We have to make a dictionary. The key has to match, this key right here has to match this one, right? Oops, this one right here, right? So those have to be the same. Okay. So that's read. So I think we've talked about this, but this method will, what does this method do?
Just gets one person.
Yeah. So this is the class method in user. And I think that's wrong. Did I mess that up? Yep, copied from the wrong one. Sorry, forget that.
Can you also quickly just annotate, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
The ID explanation earlier saying that,
Right here?
yes, on the left, that ID needs to equate to, or needs to be equal to the ID on your user pi.
Ah, yeah. So I'm going to say the value of
I think
district
that's
has to match the ID in, am I writing this in the wrong
one
place?
minute.
No, I'm in the right place. In get one. I'm going to say in the get one method. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm saying that this ID, the value, right? I said value. Yeah, the value in this dictionary has to match the ID in, how can I say this better? The value of the dictionary has to match the ID in the, I'm going to say query
Call
string.
method or something.
Yeah, like, well, it's a query string, right? So I'm going to say in the query string. Does that make sense? Will that be helpful?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Query string.
Yeah. And a query string, I'm going to say in the get one method. And that's just the method we're calling right here. So once we pass in data, it's a dictionary, right? So when we get call get one over here, so that's going to query our database. So this method, oops, I don't want to do. So get one, I'm just going to paste this. So this is a class method to retrieve a, and I'm going to add single user from the database, and this is R and CRUD. Okay. All right. Any questions about anything so far? All right. So we're down to read. We're up to update finally. So the next one, so read only takes one method, one route, right? Because all we're doing is reading. Now this one is, and I think I just said it, this is update. So update, like create, is going to take two methods. So we need a method to display the form. We need a method to handle the form once it's returned. Okay, so this method, the first one, will display to the user, right? To the user our form. And this one will handle it once it comes back. So what does this method do here? The get one. Did I? Yeah. No. Okay, we already talked about it. So this one gets one, this one gets one as well. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse. So the get one basically retrieves a user from the database. Why are we getting one? Why do we call this?
Because it's a user that's changing their data.
Yeah, so we want to, when we populate our form for the update, we need to get the user that we can pre-populate the form on, right? So if I come here and I say, if I want to edit David Palmer, right? When I click on edit, his information is already there. Okay, so the way I do that is in my method. Too much open. There we go. In my method, I call the get one, and that returns. And then once I have my user, I can pass it along to the edit user view. Okay, so update, and we're finally up to, any questions on update? I don't want to speed through.
Yeah, so if we're posting on this route,
Mhm.
And, oh no, we're redirecting.
So we're not, yeah, we're not posting on this route. This route is the first one displays the form, second one processes the form. So this is the
Yeah,
display
okay.
route. This is the, I don't know, handle data route.
Gotcha.
And then when we redirect here, I mean, I'm not sure, update, I think update return, yeah, because it's an insert, right? Yeah, so this will return the ID as well, but you can also, since we have the ID in the form, you could do either one. When we so if we redirect, if I come in here and edit Dave and I update, it's going to take me to Dave's show page, right? So this is users, he's the third one. So to get to that route, I can just use the ID that's in the form, or I can use the ID that's returned from the user query. Okay. All right, and the last one is delete. Okay, so we have, I call it destroy user. That's what it's called in Rails. So I just, old habit. So destroy user takes in a int as a parameter in my route. I pass that to the method, pass it in as a dictionary, same way we do before, right? Whenever we're passing anything in, right? Destroy user takes a dictionary, returns an object. And then we just redirect to the route or to the root route. Okay. Then let me just add the annotations that I have here. So copy. So update is class method to update the database, and the destroy method is the class method for deleting and is the D in CRUD. Any questions? Okay, cool. So the destroy method, I'm just going to add this annotation. So it's the class method and user class, and it just says where to find it. So again, these annotations will be available. I'll push them to the GitHub repo so you guys have them. And that's the review of CRUD, which took a long time. Any questions? All right. So I want to get as far into validations as we can. So let me close this.
Real quick, sometime before the test, are we gonna be able to go over like sessions again?
We are going over session. Yes, we're going to talk about sessions today. And actually,
cool.
we're going to talk about it right now. We're going to talk about validations involve sessions. So let me get that. Let me close this. Close. Okay, close that. Just give me 1 second. Actually, let me do it this way. Okay, so in the repository under day 10 and files, I have basic form validation. And I have the same application set up. So I'm going to open this in a new terminal. Say code period open. Okay, so for our form validations, let me open one more window, give me 1 second. There we go. So I'm going to start basically from the beginning. I'm not going to take as long to go through as I did before, but we're going to start at our root. So let me, I just got to run this real quick. So I'm just going to say pip env install make sure that everything, because I'm starting a new session, so nothing's in there. So I'm going to run that. I have my pip file. All I need is Flask and MySQL, so I'm good. Let's say pip env shell and Python server. Am I in the right one? That's weird. Is my server? No, it's right there. No, I put it, okay, that's what happened. It was in my, I don't know what's going on. Hold on. LS, there it is, okay. Oh, I see what I'm doing.
You just need to delete those inside.
Yeah, I was in the wrong, let me do this again. Sorry about that. Sorry for the delay. Now I'm in the right folder. And now I don't have my server, so I need it in here. Okay, now I should be okay. Just run that again, just in case. The BNB shell. Python, oops. There we go, sorry about that. Okay, so now my server's running and I'm going to open the application and go to localhost. All right, so now when I try to add a user and I try to add a user where the name is too short, right? So I get validations. So validations are basically what you see whenever we fill out forms on the internet and we don't enter the correct information. The validations will appear usually next to where you're typing or at the top, and it'll display what's missing from the form. So to get this to work, does anybody know how we get this to work? Nobody did the reading? I'm shocked. So first thing we need is we need to use something called Flash, and Flash involves using sessions. Okay, so we need session, we need Flash. So to get these messages to display, we use a version of session called Flash, and this will display only for one reset. So if I reset the form, they go away. So to set validations, we define a static method on our class. So when I want to validate my user, I go to user, and we add a static method at the bottom or in our class, right? So static method, we have just call it validate user. It takes a dictionary and it's going to return a Boolean. So we start out by assuming that a user is valid, right? Because we just assume that it's true. And then if something fails, if some mistake is made, the user types in a password that's too short or whatever, we then reassign the isValid method to false. And then the flash method is what displays the message on our screen. Okay, so we go through whatever validations we want to make. I didn't mean to have the email in here. We'll talk about this after the break. But to validate an email, we use a regular expression. That's up here. We'll talk more about that in the afternoon. But so for validations, anything we want to validate, if we want to make sure that if we do a password confirmation, we want those to match. or if we want the length to be the password to be a certain length, we basically pass in the user dictionary that we get from the form. And then this method returns either true or false based on whether those validations pass or not. Okay, questions about this?
I know you explained it earlier, but on line 48, can you just remind me what that arrow wool means?
Yes. So this doesn't have to be here. You can take this out. I recommend you use it though, just because it helps. But all this does is when I call this method or try to write this method, Visual Studio Code will automatically pop up a little box that tells me what this method takes and what I can expect it to return. So I call this method in my controller. So when I try to create a user, I call this user validate. So when I hover over it, it tells me that information that I put when I define my method. So I have this, it says that it's going to take a dictionary and it's going to return a Boolean. Okay, so that just helps in development because it's hard to keep track of all the methods and what they take and what they return. So this is just a tool that's there to help you keep track of that stuff. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, sure.
Real quick, so this is why does it take a dictionary again? Is that how it has to be for the?
Yeah, so what do we get back when we create a form?
Is it the dictionary then?
Yeah, so when
So
we
that's
call,
just-
remember request.form, we get that kind of weird immutable dict thing that comes back.
Yeah,
But
with like the weird.
for all intents and purposes, it's a dictionary.
Okay.
So when we call this validate user, back where I defined it, I pass it a dictionary, right? And then the way I do my validations is I take whatever the user property is, right? Whatever the key is in the dictionary, right? So first name, when I fill out my form, is going to be Tyler, last name is going to be Maxwell. But if Ed tried to fill out my form, he'd be out of luck because he wouldn't pass the validation. So let me change this for Ed. Okay, so this is when I pass this in, when I call this method, it's passing in what I get from request.form. So I can automatically, without doing any other processing, go through and validate and make sure everything matches. And then if it doesn't, I set this method, the flash message, which then is available on my view. So if I go to my template, real fast, where is it? So in the template, we use this Jinja syntax to display our messages. So this is just the syntax that's used, messages equals, and then the function we have to call is get flashed messages. That's just part of the flash library, right? And then if messages, meaning if this returns something. So if we had any errors, it's going to loop over the messages and print them, and I just print them in a paragraph tag. So when I come back and fill out my form, Ed, but if he, I don't think I'm validating an email. I think I have the email validation set up, so that won't pass. Yeah, it says, oh, Ed, I forgot both of your names are. Okay, so Edward M would pass though. So the first validation that fails, it's appearing here because in my view, I set up the validation to display in this Jinja syntax. Okay, I know your attention spans are probably like at a max. So questions before I stop for the morning?
So on line 14, that's like getting the function or method that you got earlier or that you wrote earlier. And the second one is saying if that happens. And then the third one is like to loop through the messages, which is on line 17.
Exactly. So if there are any errors that are returned from my validate user function or method, then those flash messages will be sent. And the reason they're able to be sent is they're part of the sessions that's using sessions basically to make those available on my view. Okay. Any other questions?
Get flash messages at though?
I'm sorry?
Where was the get flash messages at?
The get flash messages, that's just the syntax. That's just the message or the method we call to get any messages that are in the flash method. So this is just part of the syntax. That's just the syntax we use to get the messages. It's built into Flash.
Oh, okay.
Can you explain again just one more time the with messages statement there? What it's doing?
Yeah, so with messages, with is I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like another way to iterate. So we're saying with messages, you'll use this syntax if you're reading from files. It'll say with file.open. You can think of it as just another way to like iterate over items. So the with
Okay.
messages is sort of like pulling the data from the messages, and then we're if messages, meaning if there's anything in this, then we loop over it.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to stop because I went way over. So stop sharing, stop recording.